Welcome to the Capitol Rundown. I'm Kara Sundlin. This is where we bring you the politics that matter to you with balance from both sides of the aisle. We have Republican Themis Klarides and Democratic strategist Jimmy Tickey going through all the things of the week. So thank you both for being here on our special streaming show. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
So let's get right into this. We want to talk about finances because I know it's on top of everyone's minds. We've talked a lot about tariffs, but let's start locally. We were talking about the Connecticut budget, and I know that can be affected by what's happening federally, but the Republicans now have their budget. We talked about the Democrats putting out their budget, some thinking it was too much, asking for too much. The Republicans have their response. What does this all mean to the average person and where we end up? Let me start with you, Jimmy.
So this is all a part of the process, right? As a part of our state legislative process, we need to get to a balanced budget by June 4th, which is the day that the state session will gavel out. So we are in the final weeks of this budget process. You saw the governor release his budget, then you saw the Democratic budget be released, and now the Republicans have come out with a budget. And so there's actually more that all seem to agree with in terms of the budget than they disagree with. Both the Democratic budget and the Republican budget did increase the funding for special education funding, for local school funding, and for nonprofit funding. Because we are seeing such costs and programs being rolled back by the federal government, including programs that our nonprofits really rely on. There is value in our nonprofits, and so you see some costs, or rather some funding for those nonprofits being increased. But there are some differences, and this is all a part of the process as each side now comes with their own budget, working together to figure out which are the ways that we could agree with to have a compromise to get to a budget by June 4th. It is interesting that we often talk about the cap, the budget cap, which is a law that was enacted about 35 years ago about not being able to spend over a certain amount of money.
Yeah.
And everyone's getting a little creative with the spending cap, both the governor's budget, the Democratic budget, and even the Republican budget in finding some ways to move around that cap to ensure that we're meeting the needs of people while also staying under that budget cap.
Okay, so I'm sure you have something to say about that, Themis, because I know you're a fan of cap and the guardrails, and if they're not really guardrails, then I don't know.
Well, the difference between, I mean, I agree with Jimmy on most things he just said, but the real difference is the Republicans actually stayed under the caps of the bonding cap, the spending cap, and the volatility cap, where the Democrats actually acknowledge that they're not under all of those caps. You know, the great things about the Republican budget, and I know a little bit about it because as leader, I wrote them for several years, and I'm very proud of the fact that they have money in their budget for Medicaid funding, you know, for local food, local school programs, which give healthy food to our local schools and get it from our local farmers. So, you know, it's you get two bites of the apple there, that we're helping a lot of people. You know, the Katie Beckett waiver, which helps kids with disabilities that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford, it puts them into the Medicaid program. You know, domestic violence programs, food share, you know, all of these areas and nonprofits, of course. So all these areas that we believe are priorities in the state of Connecticut. You know, the one thing that the Republican budget did do, and we've talked about this before, I always talk about prioritizing, like you do in your home. There's not unlimited funds, and you have to decide what the most important things are. And the things I just mentioned are certainly some of the most important things. But it's also about downsizing government in a responsible way, not with the hatchet, but with the scalpel kind of thing.
Okay.
So one of their proposals was getting rid of all these deputy commissioners and all of these agencies, which are, quite frankly, wasteful to a certain extent. And those are ways where you're not hurting nonprofits, you're not hurting Medicaid recipients, you're not hurting domestic violence groups, you're not hurting people that really need our help the most. But you're downsizing government. And the other thing that was different in the Republican budget than the Democrat budget was that it actually funded state employee, active and retired health care benefits. Okay. You know, we've given our word that this is what you're going to get in your benefits, and we have to keep our word.
So now we need to talk about, there's definitely a difference of words between the workers, the machinists, and the people who run Pratt & Whitney, one of America's biggest jet engine companies. They are striking. Every day in the news we're talking about the machinists. This is day 3 as we speak right now, and Pratt has said it thinks it's doing a great job and has no reason to come to the table. How does this affect Connecticut as a whole, because this is one of our biggest companies. Jimmy?
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just the workers in East Hartford and Middletown and the workers of Pratt & Whitney, but it's all those small and medium-sized suppliers and small businesses that feed into the manufacturing that we have going on here in Connecticut. There are so many small manufacturers that might paint parts or design certain parts that go into those jet engines. And so it's a whole supply chain that we have here in Connecticut that are reliant on the workers and on the work that Pratt & Whitney gets. You know, Pratt & Whitney last year made over $2 billion They have over $100 billion with a B in back contracts that they will be fulfilling. And it's our Connecticut workers that make all the difference every day on those factory floors. It is about our national security, and it's about the work that they do right here in Connecticut. And so the workers are expecting for good wages, good benefits, and for the commitment that Pratt & Whitney is here to stay here in Connecticut.
Okay. And Themis, what do you think?
And again, I certainly agree. We need to support our workers. We need to keep businesses and jobs in Connecticut for all the reasons that Jimmy mentioned. The problem here is the fight should not be with Pratt or fill in the blank business. The fight should be with the state of Connecticut, because when you talk to these workers at Pratt, they say their biggest issue, amongst a few of them, but their biggest issue is job security, because businesses and jobs are leaving Connecticut to go to less expensive states. They specifically said that. And after year after year after year of tax increases historically in the state of Connecticut, we know we're a high tax state, whether it's personal income tax or whether it's property tax, fill in the blank. And then you add to that the mandates put on business by the legislature and the governor for many years. And what you have is a state that is between 45 and 50 of 50 states that are the least business friendly in the United States of America. And when you're that business unfriendly, of course jobs are going to leave. So Pratt has offered a 4% wage increase this year, immediate, 3.5 next year, and 3 next year, the year after that. Now that's a big number, to be honest, relative to the time we're in. But I get what their issue is, and I understand they're saying it's not keeping up with the cost of living and their health benefits, and I get all that. But the bigger problem we have in this state is it is too expensive to live and work, and that's why jobs are leaving.
And Kara, I would just add that one of the things we've done really well in Connecticut is design a whole pipeline for young people to get involved into manufacturing, get involved in the advanced trades. And we have some high schools that now have a training center.
Yes.
Our state universities and colleges have manufacturing centers and advanced manufacturing centers. So we really have involved manufacturing as a part of who we are here in the state of Connecticut, and getting young people to think about pursuing a factory job. This is very different than the factory jobs of yesteryear with 3D printing and clean factory floors, and they can do so much and have such a successful career, just as these businesses are being very successful. That should also reflect in the workforce.
So, Trump has said that he wants to bring manufacturing back to America. And I'm wondering, those policies, what he wants to do, whether you agree with it or not, but if it's going to happen, does this help companies like Pratt, Themis?
I mean, if he does something that actually helps companies.
Okay.
He says he wants to bring manufacturing back. I don't know exactly what that means until he tells us what it means.
Okay.
But, as far as our VOTEC schools in the state of Connecticut, I've always been a huge supporter. We put budgets together that funded them more than many other budgets. The pipeline, I put legislation in that to educate kids. We shouldn't be talking to kids when they're in 8th grade about whether they want to go to a VOTEC school. We should be talking to them when they're in 3rd and 4th and 5th grade, so they understand that there are options. Everybody doesn't need to go to college, and everybody shouldn't go to college. Our VOTEC schools are jammed to the brim. We have in our area, we have Platt Tech in Milford, we have Emmett O'Brien Tech and Ansonia, and they're amazing schools, and they push out amazing kids in all of these vocational arts. But kids need to understand that there are more options, and we need to make sure we fund them so there are enough places for these kids to go.
Right, absolutely. And that we have Pratt & Whitney right here in Connecticut for them to go to.
Yeah, well, let's hope there's not danger of them leaving. I don't know if that's... if you guys know something on that, let us know, insiders.
Business unfriendly.
Okay.
That's the problem.
So let's, we'll continue to follow that and see what happens, but some good points about what's going on behind the scenes. Let's talk about SALT. You may not at home know what this is, but most of you just did your tax returns. And here in Connecticut, if you have a mortgage, you're allowed to, this is a big thing, everyone all over America deducts their mortgage interest. It's one of the reasons you say, I want to buy instead of rent. There's a tax advantage. But there's, what's going on with these taxes, and why is Connecticut especially maybe at more risk than, say, other states, Themis?
Well, SALT stands for state and local taxes, right? Very simply put. And what people are allowed to do is they're allowed, when you filed your federal tax return, if you itemize, you're allowed to deduct, say, your property tax, how much your property tax payments. And that was a big help to a state like Connecticut, New York, California, the higher property tax states.
Yeah, we get a tax deduction.
And that was an unlimited amount for many years. In 2017, interestingly enough, under President Trump the first time, put in a bill that limited that to a $10,000 cap. Now, a lot of the legislators, Republican and Democrat, because this is not a partisan issue at this point. It's about which state you live in. So if you live in New York, and if you live in California, and if you live in and you represent those towns, those states, then you're pushing. So there's big negotiations going on right now in Congress about the budget bill that the president wants to pass, and how he's not going to get votes from a lot of legislators in Congress if they don't increase, at the very least, increase that $10,000 cap.
As midterms come up, they call the blue states, but just because the blue states are more expensive, right? So,
but it's also, those 2017 tax cuts are expiring by the end of this year. So if they don't reinstate them, they just go away completely. So this budget, there's a lot of moving parts in it, and it's Republicans and Democrats kind of binding together based on their geography, saying we need to increase this at least to $25,000, if not more. And so there's a lot of give and take going on, similar to our state budget.
Jimmy?
Yes, absolutely. This was a part of Trump's first term in a very bad tax package that was passed, and it included this $10,000 cap on people's local taxes, basically their property taxes, as was said. And so now that tax plan has been happening for the last couple of years, people have seen what it has done to them. And so there is now an effort, even from Republican legislatures, as Themis mentioned, because they now see this really impacted states that do have higher property taxes, and it impacted states that are more populated. So this is an issue in California, throughout the Northeast, particularly in New Jersey, New York, and right here in Connecticut. We used to not have that $10,000 cap, and that $10,000 cap is not helpful financially to families. And so all of our Connecticut members of our Connecticut delegation did not support that tax package to begin with, and they certainly support increasing the cap on salt. And there are now Republicans in Congress also seeing that this really is negatively impacting their constituents, and so there are negotiations happening to try to lift that $10,000 cap so that people can have a greater deduction on their home and their local property taxes.
Okay, so these are all things to keep an eye on, because they're going to affect your own pocketbook of whether or not you're going to get, how much you're going to get in those tax deductions and all of that. I want to move on, though. There's a homeschooling bill we've been reporting on. It came out of the concern that here was this kid in Waterbury who police say was held captive for 2 decades by his mom, stepmother rather, who pulled him out in 4th grade and kept him in a house of horrors, and nobody seemed to really know about it. Now they're looking at how do we prevent this from happening? So there's a bill on homeschooling right now that would add some new restrictions, yet it's become super controversial. Themis, from the Republican side, I know people don't like a lot of government restrictions on what you can do with your kids, but what's your take on what needs to happen here?
Well, they had an informational hearing in the legislature yesterday or the day before. And just so people know, an informational hearing doesn't even allow people to testify.
Okay.
Which I think was kind of ridiculous, that they should have allowed people to testify instead of just kind of talking amongst themselves and having people present information. But that's what they had. And right now, they don't have a specific bill that will do that. But what's going on is this. We all saw the horror of what happened in Waterbury. And the question should really be, who failed this man, this boy now man? Who failed him? The state of Connecticut failed him. Okay, there's no question. The question is, where in the state of Connecticut was he failed? DCF definitely failed him. The police, I'll say the police failed him, except the police work with DCF, and DCF is the one that gets these complaints and then dispatches the police, right? So I feel if you want to look at the homeschooling rules in the state of Connecticut, which are very liberal, which are
people move here for
which
our
are
liberal
almost
rules.
non-existent, by the way. I mean, it just recommends a notice of intent to take your child out. You don't have to do it. It recommends a yearly review. You don't have to do it. There's basically teach reading, writing, arithmetic, history, civics, the important things. But there are no check-ins. So if you have an issue with that, that's one thing. But that needs to be put aside right now, because to imply that because of our homeschooling rules in Connecticut, that's why this happened, is completely ignoring the problem. The state of Connecticut failed them, and DCF was the problem, and the police were not notified properly to make sure they continue to check on this. We want to make sure this never happens again. This is not a direct fault of the homeschooling rules in Connecticut, whether I agree with them or not.
Yeah. And Jimmy, what do you think?
No, I agree. And there was certainly failures in that case that we saw in Waterbury. And there were reports that people did try to come to the house, but the family basically declined. And so they were not able to go any further to check on the then child. I think when it comes to schooling, it's about no matter how you're getting your education, in a public school, a private school, or being homeschooled, there's really two fundamentals. One, are you learning? And two, are you safe? And so that's very easy to track when you're in public or private schooling in person because...
Yeah, we have mandatory reports. If there's
Right.
bruises or things, they have to say something.
Right.
So, but yet parents are very upset. They say it's punishing them if they add more regulations.
Well, one of the ideas that has been thrown out is what about just at least a 1-year check-in to see the student at least once a year to ensure there is learning and that they are safe. We do that in a public or a private school. We physically see them. We see that they are learning.
I wonder
There are
if they'd
test
even have
scores.
enough people to go out and physically check them.
Well, and that's the question, for the state to see, do we have the capacity? But also, it might be worth our while to ensure that if a student is being homeschooled, that there are some formalities, right? Just some terms that we could agree to for all those students, whether they're being homeschooled, whether in private school, or whether in public school.
And right now, again, an annual review is suggested, but
There's no enforcement.
it's not even enforcement, it's just suggested.
Yeah.
So
There's
there's
no-
nothing to enforce.
Yeah.
And if we remember, in this Waterbury situation, the school noticed that things didn't seem right. The child at the time was digging through the garbage for food. There were different signs that they are trained to see that said something maybe they're not eating properly at home. Maybe they're being malnourished. Maybe something's wrong. And that's how it kind of triggered the DCF and the police get involved, which was great. That's how it should have been. But to Jimmy's point, after they wouldn't let them in, then what? To me, that's where the problem occurs, because in a public or private school, you physically see them all the time.
Right. Yeah.
And this is not the same. Also in our statute, it just says they have to have equivalent education, right? And that's
How do you
it.
know?
And
Right.
that's it. So, I think the failure was DCF got involved, the police got involved, they went out there, the stepmother said no. So then what? We can't just take no for an answer in certain circumstances. DCF and police are trained to see the signs of things that are going awry.
Yeah.
And they have to that's why we have probable cause laws, right? Do you know to 100% certainty something's wrong? No. But do you have enough cause to believe that something's wrong? They have to go in there. Health and safety are the two of the most important things that we do as state government, and that's what we have to make sure we're always doing.
Okay, so we'll see where that bill ends up. There's another bill that did, correct me if I'm wrong, Themis, it passed, and this is a contraception bill?
It passed in the
the
House.
House.
I don't know if it went through the Senate yet.
Okay, so this is for everyone who's parents of teens out there. This is going to affect everyone like that. So explain what's in this bill that maybe a lot of moms and dads are not realizing or don't know might become law.
Well, right now, the way the law is currently in the state of Connecticut, we have abortion is available to adults and minors 13 and up, minors without parental consent, up until the time of viability. Now, the Supreme Court wrote that language in Roe versus Wade at the time, and there's no exact week, but they estimate it's 4 months, 5 months. And then after that, if the life or health of the mother or the child is at risk in accordance with a healthcare provider. But for minors, the only thing that changed in the bill that was passed in the House is it allows minors to get contraception legally. Up until this bill was passed, and under current law still, a girl cannot go, say a 16-year-old girl cannot go and get birth control pills. But a boy can go and buy condoms. Because it's legal, there's no age restriction on it. So that really wasn't particularly fair. In addition, it's pain management when the procedure is occurring. It was very interesting to me to see the vote tally when they voted, and I talked to several of the House members. People that I know are not pro-choice, and people that I know support parental consent for minors, but voted for this bill because they said to themselves, it's 2025. We want to make sure that abortion is legal, safe, and rare, right? And so we allow kids to get contraception. Maybe we will have less abortions. Maybe we will have less unwanted pregnancies. And that was the gist of that bill.
So let me just make sure I understand, then I want Jimmy to comment. This new bill, if it goes through all the way, would mean that kids can under the age of 18 can get contraception, be it birth control.
Between 13 and 17. But
Between
remember,
13
if it's under age 13,
Right.
under current law and still going forward,
teenagers.
it's a mandatory report.
Okay, so 13 to 17 could go in and get contraception without parental consent.
Yes.
Also could get an abortion without parental
that's-
consent, but that was already the
That's
case.
current, yes.
It's just adding the contraception layer. Okay, and so this is making its way through the legislature now. Jimmy, what's your take?
Yeah, so it passed the House, it goes on to the Senate, and then ultimately to be signed. And I agree, and I was pleased to see the vote count because this particularly was not about abortion. This is about young people having access to information, to testing, maybe to testing for infections, to going to a school-based health center, and then to getting contraception. And then young people, just like adults, should have the availability of information. They have their own autonomy to make these decisions and to get the contraceptions for themselves. And so it did pass the House, it goes on to the Senate, and then ultimately to be signed into law. Mind you, 24 other states have a law just like this. So we are not leading the way on anything. This is about young people having the autonomy to have contraceptions, to have information, and to be able to make decisions about themselves and their own health care.
Dennis, I want you to chime in as well.
Well, I think, yeah.
Airing here. That's okay, guys. It's live TV.
We're live TV. We're live TV. Never a dull moment.
This bill started out as a huge bill. All sorts of things were changing, right? It's like we're talking about the budget, how it's kind of a starting point with all the ideas put into a big room, and basically, you'll pick and choose the ones that end up finally becoming law. That's what happened here, and I followed it very closely, and it was actually how government should work in a sense, because there were things you thought were great that I would never support, or you thought were great that I would never support, or vice versa, and then, the two things were because of information, knowledge, and responsibility. And the goal here is to not say, you're a minor, you shouldn't have sex, because we know that kids do. Right. It's about making sure that there are as few unwanted pregnancies as possible, and therefore less abortions.
Okay. So we're going to have to leave it there for right now as we watch what happens for that bill. But also just overarching that Connecticut, while some states are really starting to restrict abortion access, make it tougher and harder, even try to criminalize leaving state lines, Connecticut's going the opposite direction and just making sure it is codified and as open and as possible, and also offering contraception. We kind of want to go in the most free of those directions.
Right.
Yes, and we codified in 1990,
right.
by the way.
It's codified, and
codified. It's
absolutely.
always so in Connecticut. It's part of our state law
Absolutely.
that abortion is legal.
Absolutely.
Okay, so lots going on. Of course,
Yes.
we'll continue to watch everything that's happening, and I want to encourage all of you to watch the whole episode. You can go back and watch other Capitol reports. They're still applicable, and
Yes.
things are still going
Yes.
on. So all you have to do is go to WFSB.com and click on local news. You'll find the Capitol rundown right there. And we also are streaming live here on WFSB Plus. If you want to see previous episodes and you're watching on WFSB Plus, go to the top of the app, click on Capitol Rundown, and you can watch all the previous episodes. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Jimmy
Thank
and
you.
Themis, bringing us the politics from both sides of the aisle. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.